Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest installment of our Homeroom Education Leaders webinar. We'll wait just a couple more minutes to let some other folks join us, and then we will get started. Again, certainly good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining our webinar today. I'm very excited about today's discussion, which is focused on building strong communities through service learning and civic engagement. My name is Jalil Hart and have the good fortune of serving as the director of the K-12 team here at the Hunt Institute. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the Institute, we were founded by four-term Governor Jim Hunt, and we're pleased to serve as a resource for policymakers on education issues from prenatal through higher education. We do offer in-person and virtual convenings. We conduct research, and we offer other forms of technical assistance to states around the country. Before we jump into today's conversation, I do want to provide a brief overview of how we'll spend our time together today. We'll start with about 30 minutes of a moderated discussion with our panelists, and then we'll pivot to a Q&A section with you all, the audience. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion, do feel free to put those in the Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to address each of them today. We will record this conversation, and in the next few days, we'll post it on our YouTube channel, which I do encourage you all to visit to see the other conversations that our team and others have hosted most recently. Finally, we encourage you to join us on Twitter, where you can participate and further the conversation using the hashtag #EdHomeroom. So let's jump in. I'm so appreciative of the panelists who are joining us today. Because of their expertise around this topic of service learning and civic engagement. So service learning and civic engagement can transform school communities, fostering a sense of belonging and responsibility among all students. Despite growing concerns over a politically divided country, our 2024 Across the Aisle survey has found meaningful agreement across demographic groups regarding education proposals. So today's conversation will explore some practical strategies for integrating service learning into curriculum, empowering students to take an active role in their communities, and enhancing their educational experience through real-world problem solving. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker, who's the Commissioner of Education for the Connecticut State Department of Education. We have Louise Dubé, who is the CEO of iCivics, and we have Dr. Arthur Schwartz, who's the president of Character.org. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll jump right into the conversation. Commissioner, we'll start with you. Connecticut has a red, white, and blue schools program, which recognizes K-12 public and private schools for their outstanding civic education efforts. Can you provide an overview of the program and how it fosters civic engagement in schools across the state?
So, Jalil, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And my thanks to the Hunt Institute for facilitating another Homeroom with Education Leaders webinar on this very essential topic. And I'm pleased to be here alongside my panel members here today for this conversation. So, let me share some information with you about this program in Connecticut. So at the Department of Education, we do recognize the value and importance of civics education. We support a number of critically focused programs, civically focused programs from the Civics Bee, the Kid Governor program, Red, White, and Blue schools, and we also incorporate civics education at every grade level, K through 12. We have social studies standards, which we'll talk about later, and curriculum in this space. But the Red, White, and Blue School program was launched in 2016, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, innovative partnerships between the Connecticut Secretary of the State, the Connecticut Democracy Center, and the Department of Education, along with their school districts. The goal of this program is to increase the innovative teaching of civics in government in our schools, and it emphasizes the importance of active and informed citizenship throughout students' education in a collection of ways that will spur whole life community engagement. The program is designed as such to really make sure we're connecting students to community, and some of that could be their internal school community as well as external. The project design is connected to establish themes annually that promote students' active engagement, and they use a rubric that's designed as a part of their guide to develop their projects. Last year's theme was connecting communities. This year's theme is our government, our voice. Really great. And you can think about so many ways that you can jump off from those themes for students. To qualify, at least one class in a school must meet the program's minimum standards as outlined in the rubrics. And whole school systems may also be recognized if the elementary, middle, and high school classes participate. And they can do this participation at any point during the school year. All grades K through 12 can participate in this program. And many of our entries has come from elementary school level. And I know that's something that my panel members here will probably be excited to see, that we are getting started early. So that is really a great thing. The schools meet the minimum criteria in the rubric, and then they're recognized. And we have an annual recognition ceremony and program. We bring them together, Secretary of the State, the Democracy Center, or schools come in, and up to 3 submissions are recognized as outstanding schools. The teachers, the students, they present their projects, and we send a press release out, and our event is covered by the media, which is really great. The core of the program is getting students actively engaged and participating in the communities. So now I've told you the what. Now, how does that foster civic engagement? Let me introduce you to Cornwall Consolidated School, named the outstanding Red, White, and Blue School in Connecticut, and got their first ever $1,000 prize, right? So we're stepping it up here. These 7th grade students were recognized for their exceptional civic engagement project focused on bringing attention to the challenges people with disabilities often face. And so I invited these students to a recent State Board of Education meeting because I wanted to amplify their efforts and really get really good traction for the work that they've done. This is what we saw, and this is what we learned. They researched the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they looked for ways to make their school and their community more inclusive. They updated their handicap parking spaces to display the new handicap signage. You think about that. I learned that there's new signage, by the way. We should all look that up. More active signage. They learned beginner sign language and Braille, and they hung Braille signs around the school. They made them using their 3D printer to print the signs. And they taught 2nd graders the elements of both forms of communication and informed them about the ADA. They also researched and interviewed an individual living with a disability. So when you think about that, they described their own experience as fun, informative, and something, in their words, they will remember for the rest of their lives. These students, in their presentation, they talked about how their understanding changed. They talked about how their empathy increased because of the work that they've done. They said they're proud of making their schools more inclusive and representative, and they continue to make sure that the school stays inclusive. Now, how awesome is that? That is just one example of the impactful change that I believe we can see in our communities when we empower our students' voices. We can talk about that some more, but through this partnership, just to conclude about this program, that this is one way that we're increasing innovative teaching of civics and government in Connecticut and laying the foundation for really strong civic engagement for our students. We're building stronger connections with local communities. We're promoting social responsibility, and we're developing, I believe, the next generation of informed, active citizens. It starts early, and I'm really excited to share that with you today.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for that. That was such a wonderful overview of such a great program that's happening in Connecticut. And Louise, with that, I want to turn to you because there's some schools and some students who may not understand the difference between a service learning and civic engagement. And that's a really important distinction to make before we can start engaging in these ways. So could you talk a little about about the difference between those two and how each approach contributes to preparing students for active and informed citizenship. Then I'd also like for you to provide a little overview of iCivics and the initiatives you're leading to engage students in respectful dialogue around differing viewpoints.
Well, first of all, I'm going to join the commissioner in thanking the Hunt Institute for giving us this opportunity to talk about all this important subject. It's really a fantastic opportunity for us. So, and I'll just link one thing to what the commissioner just said. iCivics runs a program called ICSL, Institute for Community and Service Leadership. And it is a program that's deeply integrated with the military, areas that are really tied closely to the military. And it's so funny because as you were talking about the program in Connecticut, Commissioner, I remember going to a capstone project as part of the ICSL where a group of high school students this time, one of the kids in the group had a friend who had broken their leg and realized that there were no ADA parking spots available near the entryway or insufficient, certainly did not meet the ADA requirements. And that group got together and did something about it. And since then, the school has amended the parking spots. So this is an issue that's live for students all over the country. Apparently, this was Maryland. So that's that. Let me just spend a couple minutes. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, but a couple minutes about iCivics. We were founded in 2009 by the first woman on the Supreme Court of the United States, Sandra Day O'Connor. And her idea was super simple. She knew how important it was that the young people of this country understand our systems and how they came about to be, the importance of checks and balances, they're the fundamental principles of our country, and how that is linked to our country's strength. And that's not always obvious to people, but it is. So you need knowledge, you need skills, you need dispositions, and you need virtues. And all of those together is what we tried to convey. iCivics operates in 80% of counties in the United States. We serve 145,000 educators every year, 9 million students. We're known for our games, but we are also lesson plans. We have a full U.S. history curriculum. We are providing professional learning services as well now. All of our resources are free, and we are strictly nonpartisan. So you are safe with the resources from iCivics. With that, I'm going to address your first point, which was about service learning. Service learning, from our perspective, is a discipline that is deeply anchored within the classroom. So what makes service learning useful for students is the way that the commissioner described it, an experience that ties the knowledge, the skills, the dispositions, and virtues into an experiential, community-based experience, right? And if the adults take that seriously and provide the preparation, the activity, but also the reflection after, then you have an experience that, as the commissioner says, stays with you forever and really cements your attachment to your community, which is where I think the attachment in this country starts from. So we have very different communities in this country, but yet we all have self-government and we all need to be involved in that practice, right? So knowing and then practicing your involvement. So I'll leave it there and we'll come back to it, I'm sure.
Sure, thank you for that. And I appreciate the way you bridged those gaps for some of our participants. Dr. Schwartz, I'd like to turn to you because one of the biggest components of service learning and civic engagement is good character. So character.org's 11 principles for schools guide the cultivation of strong culture of character. Can you discuss these principles and how school and district leaders are effectively implementing and sustaining comprehensive character development initiatives?
Well, thank you, Jaleel. And again, I just want to echo what my other panelists have said. Thank you to the Hunt Institute for inviting all of us to talk about this important topic. We have been here at character.org for over 30 years. We don't have a program or curriculum, but we do have these 11 principles. They're a framework, a roadmap that helps schools develop a culture of character. And I'd like to begin by just talking about character, just the word itself, because Louise used the word virtues. We use the term core values. Others say character strengths, dispositions. There's a lot of different ways, but they're so important around this idea of character. So we think of four domains of character. First, moral character, our ethical self, honesty, integrity. Second, performance character, what we call our best effort self, perseverance, responsibility. These are all different dimensions of character. Third is where I think schools have started, which is intellectual character. The idea of being curious, the idea of taking perspective, the critical thinking self. So important for service learning and civic engagement. And fourth, which is why we're here today, civic character, what I would call our common good self. And both Louise and the commissioner talked about that. Respect, fairness, kindness, compassion, and most importantly, contributing to the common good. So those four domains, moral, performance, intellectual, civic, when you combust them all together, that's the person of character and the different virtues that build that character. But you asked me about the principles. I'm not going to go through all 11, but I just want to highlight three of them real fast. The first is principle one. It's the idea that the school, every school, elementary, pre-K, a pre-K center, middle or high school, that the staff, the community have come together along with the students to consider and select a set of these virtues or core values or strengths that are, what the school stands for, whether they're respect or responsibility or honesty or compassion, about four or six of those core values that sort of are at the core, the heartbeat of the school. And that's principle one. Principle two is this is not just something that you should see when you walk into the building that, the four or six core values are up on the wall. They need to be into every part of the school culture, the classroom, the curriculum, but also discipline policies, as well as what's happening in the lunchroom or on the school bus, even staff development. That those core values are woven into all aspects of the school culture, the school language, the school sort of shared accountability. And last is why I think we're here today for me is this principle five. I'm just going to read it, is that the school provides students with the opportunities to practice and reflect on their character strengths that are shaping their moral compass. And at the end of the day, that's what school should be about, is that before you graduate from elementary, middle, or high school, that this notion of that we're developing a moral compass and being able to explain what is the North Star for your compass. What do you believe in so deeply that you're making a commitment to, as what we were talking, to make this community, this school, this state, this nation, this world a better place? So that is where service learning comes in. We will talk more about it, but that's an example of what the principles are really about that help schools sort of with a roadmap to becoming a school of character.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's a really great segue into our question that I have for all three of our panelists. But before we get to that, for our participants, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please be sure to submit those in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. And back to us. The Hunt Institute's Across the Aisle survey revealed that while parents and voters are largely optimistic about community schools, they remain equally as pessimistic about education nationwide. So how can policymakers support schools and districts in fostering a culture where civic engagement and service learning become integral to students' daily experiences rather than being treated as an extracurricular or a one-time initiative? Commissioner, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Louise and Dr. Schwartz.
Thank you, and a great question for us to engage on. And so I'll share from my perspective of a state agency leader and what happens at the state agency policy level. As I mentioned to you before, is at the department here, we recognize the value and importance of civic education, especially as it relates to what we're talking about, preparing students for life beyond school. So let me start at a state a Board of Education level, I mentioned that before, in bringing students to them, but how does a state Board of Education from a policy level telegraph their support? Now in Connecticut, we have our state board has a 5-year strategic plan that they develop. The current plan is entitled Every Student Prepared for Learning, Life, and Work Beyond School. And there's a quote from the plan that says that it seeks to ensure all Connecticut learners acquire the skills and knowledge they will need to succeed in college, career, and civic life, right? In that, we're thinking that there's some things that need to happen in order for that level of preparation to take place. We've talked about, you've heard Dr. Short's critical thinking. We've talked about, the students being prepared with 21st century skills. And how do we do that so that they can be equipped for this life learning and work beyond school? So I do believe in our institutions like a state agency, state education agency, a state board of education, that these are things that we can telegraph and make a part of the work that is happening. I want to call it the climate and culture, a part of that as well, but of the work that takes place. It is our state board that also approved Connecticut social studies standards, which includes civic education at every grade level, K through 12. We have social studies model curriculum that's developed that we released June of last year that does also include civic education in every grade, K-8. So if you do that, it becomes a part of the work and not an add-on, something that I always say, don't develop something that has to be a separate add-on because our educators have a lot of things that they're needing to pay attention to. So that is really important. So we're looking at a state board of education, a state agency, but how about the legislature? How do policymakers at that level, what can they do? In 2023, in our legislative session in 2023, the legislature created the Civics Education, Civic Engagement, and Media Literacy Task Force, right? A group of folks coming together, basically looking at 4 core things, but they'll quickly share. Our own social studies consultant participate as co-chair of that committee. So now you're really building a larger field, right, of folks coming together. They're looking at existing state and national curricular standards. They're looking at classroom practices. They're looking at graduation requirements to see how all of this fits together. They're looking at media literacy. They're looking at how the administrators and government, non-government entities all can work together in this space. Reviewing and bringing all of that together so they can hear. So the bottom line is policymakers can also get involved in this process as we're building this out. We've done our own model, K-12 model digital citizenship curriculum that really talks about media and news and accuracy bias, credibility, timeliness, all of those. When we talk about character and all of that is a part of the process. And Louise will appreciate the fact that in Connecticut, we have our Connecticut Learning Hub, which is an open education resource, one-stop shop for educators, for curricula, all of that. And since 2021, iCivics has been included as a resource in the Learning Hub, again, where folks can easily get the information that they need. But key here, and I often said, it can't be about our students without them. And so in that spirit that I created during the pandemic, a nation-leading, a Voice for Change initiative during the pandemic, we basically said to students, we had all these COVID relief funds, and we said, how can we want to hear from our students for them to propose how we would spend $1.5 million of those funds. We put it right back in their hands. Civic engagement. They were able to get up to $20,000 to do something different in their school. It was amazing to watch them plan programs that, by the way, had to be voted on by their peers. They had to campaign for what they wanted to do. And we heard resoundingly from them what things were of importance to them. You would not be surprised to know that the majority of what they wanted to do was about trauma, social emotional support and learning that they wanted done. How do they make sure that social emotional and mental health supports for them and their school staff was something that they wanted to pay attention to. They wanted to think about their own academic renewal and student enrichment and get into that work. All that said, again, I like to tell you about what students did. One particular district in Enfield, Connecticut, they used through that program, bought a peer-led music learning program focused on students with disabilities. They brought that into their school community through the Voice for Change initiative. And I organized a visit with policymakers, legislators, to go see that program at work, to see the impact. And the activity was so popular that their local Board of Education voted to add this program into their curriculum for the following school year. So again, it is just so important. There are things that we can do. It wasn't a separate one-off, but it's a program that we built that was able to be infused into the work that was already happening. So I really believe that we can all engage at different levels. There's an ecosystem of support. We just need to find a way to do that seamlessly and support our districts as they're able to do that level of implementation.
Thank you so much for that, Louise.
Yeah, so first of all, Commissioner, I think if it weren't COVID, it would have been school lunch. That is sort of always been the number one, isn't it? In any event, first of all, I really appreciated your survey. It was very much in line with other research from Pew and others. We look like we're really polarized. And when you start digging down, particularly at the local level, there's a lot more agreement than you might imagine by watching the news or anything of the kind. And one of the key things is that local school leaders are some of the most trusted folks in America. So that's always at least a good place to start for us. And I do think that your survey and much of what we're seeing is a reflection of how atomized and how much more we need to get closer to community as opposed to having national debates about education. Education happens locally, and that's why our motto at iCivics is civics for all, one community at a time, because you need to be real close to your community to know what's going to make a difference to those folks. So with that, I'm going to point the audience to civicsnow.org, civixnow.org. This is a coalition that iCivics has built. We have over 350 member organizations across the political spectrum, and we have banded together to say, okay, civics is really important for our nation's future. And we need to do a better job. We need for educators, but also mostly parents, to take this seriously. And one of the ways you can do that, as Commissioner said, is through policy. And those policies, we have laid out a policy menu for state policy legislators. And we also have a model legislation. What are the key tenets? We also have a map of how every state is doing against those policy outcomes. And what are the most important things? Well, for us, most important is training and making available professional learning to educators. That means time, that means commitment, and that means dollars. So that's, you don't get blood for a stone. You're going to need to invest in this if you're going to take it seriously. In addition to that, it needs time in the classroom. So it needs commitments, just like the commissioner said, in elementary, middle, and high school. So oftentimes in some states, you see only a semester-long high school course. That is not going to do it. Kids come into that unprepared with the basic ideas about what representation means, how fairness, all of the virtues and character traits that Dr. Schwartz talked about, that needs to be built from early on and reinforced all the way throughout the K-12 experience. So that's one. It also needs experiences. Clearly, it needs service learning projects, but experiences in the community. So whatever that might be, and that makes sense, that are linked to the curriculum. So these are not two separate things. We also want to see linkages to the community civic life. There are civic leaders. There are school committee members. All of those experiences can leave a profound legacy on students who see themselves in those kinds of civil servant positions. And that's an important alternative for them. There are other notions, voter pre-registration, for example, at the high school level, those might be it. So the community and the state has to customize that legislative program. But what's important is that they put emphasis on the important pieces of that policy menu, so that we can, at the end of it, take our responsibilities as adults more seriously. So one of the pieces of that I will mention, I forgot to mention, is information literacy. I think in this day and age, it is one of the most important tools that I think every parent wants for their student, which is to be able to consume information from any source in a way that actually results in understanding what's true, what's not, where the information comes from, and how to evaluate critically that information that's coming to you. So those are all the policy tools. If anybody has more questions about policy, they should get in touch with me. We have a 7-person policy team that acts as the policy team for the field.
Mm.
I'll leave it at that.
Dr. Schwartz?
Wow, this is powerful. I'm trying to take a moment just to seep it all in. I'll just never forget the first time I heard years and years ago the phrase portrait of a graduate. It is so powerful to me. I know that we can assess at elementary and middle school, at high school level, we can assess reading, we can assess math skills. But I know when I look at portraits of a graduate, either at schools or districts or statewide, that a lot of times those portraits go beyond just reading, writing, and arithmetic. They go to what, we've been talking about, these lifelong skills, these durable skills. So I just want to say I envision a future where policymakers have put together a portrait of a graduate that includes what we're talking about today: civic competency, service, community, caring about the community in a way that contributes to this common good that we're talking about. But the key here in terms of the portrait of a graduate is, how do the students at the elementary, middle school, or high school, because a lot of times people think of portrait as just high school graduates. No, it should start in elementary school, as Louise was saying. How can we ask them to demonstrate that they have contributed to the common good? How can we ask them to demonstrate, as part of this portrait of a graduate, that they have grasped the power of the leadership skills, collaboration, listening, being a good teammate? And how can we, lastly, ask them to demonstrate about a cause, an issue in their community, in their school, again, nation or worldwide, that they care about deeply? So in our world, we talk about habits of the head, habits of the hands, and habits of the heart. And the idea is empowering student voice. Empowering student voice. So before they graduate from 5th grade or 4th grade or 8th grade or 12th grade, their voice is what we're hearing in terms of the assessment that they now have these skills, these attributes, these desires, this passion wherever they go and whatever they do in life. I really think for policymakers, it's working on this portrait of a graduate so it comes alive for everyone in the school building.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Dr. Schwartz. And that kind of leads me to one of our questions from the audience. And it's around measuring the impact of these programs. How do you all think stakeholders, schools, districts, states, and policymakers can work to measure the success of civic programs, thinking both in terms of student outcomes and I think more importantly, or equally importantly, is the community impact?
If I don't know if somebody else wants to start, but I think this is we have to one of the issues in this discipline is there is no standardized test. Well, one of the beauties of that is that parents don't like standardized tests anymore. And so there's a way in which we can demystify this a little bit. So there are a lot of benefits to civic education that are about critical thinking, collaboration, community building, and there are surveys that you can administer. I would point you to CERG, the Center for Civic Engagement at UC Riverside. They have a survey that the schools or the states can administer pre and post and determine whether there's an improvement through the instructional program that you use. So that's one way to do it. I think particularly at elementary, there are literacy benefits. So this has been proven through research that the use of high quality social studies materials at elementary increases literacy rates. So those are other benefits to that. Lastly, at the individual teacher level, this is no different than any other project in many cases, if you want to take it away. And it just depends on the rubric that you set up for success. So measuring and establish a rubric for success, it helps you be able to assess the performance of students in all of those in the experiences. But I don't know if maybe my colleagues have something else to add.
Louise, what you lay out really is really very thoughtfully done. And what I'd add to that is the ability to bring folks together in community to determine how to move forward. Too many times we end up, well, you should do this, so you should do that. And sometimes it just creates challenges, right? When you need to do that. We're now looking in Connecticut school climate and culture. How do we measure it? What is that like? You know what? We're bringing folks together so we can have this conversation, so we can determine what to do. I'm sure we'll look to see what we benchmark against other states, all of that. But you really need to have that conversation. Practitioners will be in that space, or researchers will be in that space, or own performance team will be in that space. So we can literally think about how do we do that together? And especially at the state agency level, what is it that's going to be customizable across the entire system? What does that look like? All of that. We also have external evaluators that is helping us doing research and telling us about return on investment. How do we bring all of those folks together in one space to make sure we're building it? So that would be, there may be tools, as Louise mentioned, for us to start with, but sometimes to say, we're going to take this tool that was used here and then import it in and it's going to work, sometimes doesn't necessarily do that, right? So the need to sit and really talk together and plan how to move forward is a critical piece when we talk about measure and impact. And, let's make sure we get student voices as a part of that as well. Let's talk to the community. Let's talk to families. The school family community partnership is really important as we go forward.
Well, that's Principle 10, Commissioner. So I just love the fact that you're bringing parents into it. Yeah, I just want to, many years ago, George Gallup shared with me, Arthur, he said, what gets measured gets emphasized. And boy, that brought me down until we talked. We were taking a walk while he was sharing all this to me. May he rest in peace. And then he said to me about 30 minutes later, but you know what? Not everything that counts can be counted. And that's just where I'm at right now. I think service learning and civic engagement is so important that we should have assessment tools, but why can't we just stand up and say, this counts? This is important. Our schools, our communities, we need this. And let's start with that.
All really, really great points, and I'm taking notes so that we can make sure we share these notes with others. But Commissioner, your thoughts really resonated. And there's actually a question about this, so I'm hoping you can speak to it a little bit further. But what are some tips to help sustain community-based partnerships between classrooms, schools, and community stakeholder organizations?
I am so committed to school family community partnerships so much that I have a roundtable for family and community engagement in education. It's the Commissioner's Roundtable that we started 8 years ago. I was not in this role then, but was within the agency. And maybe we can drop that information in the chat. We're a group of stakeholders, family, I mean, from across the state got together, and we even have a definition of family engagement in our state. And the document that we use is how do we leverage the voice of community? And so it's building that relationship, which is really so important. And so it's really important for us to make space for these conversations to happen, right? So we're not just telling folks what to do, but they're really a part of solutions. What are the challenges and how can we solve it together? So I do encourage, from a state agency perspective, to have that open door where there's conversations happening. For my roundtable, we meet quarterly, and it's not for me to talk at them, it's for me to hear, right, from the group. How can we improve our systems or policies or processes? And we hear that. And that committee has student voice on there as well. So we're hearing from our students. So make the space for that to happen and build trust. That's the other thing that you have to do in that space, right? You're building the trust and you're open to conversations that are happening. Sometimes you're hoping to hear the hard truths about what is happening. As I say to folks, you need to hold us accountable. Let's have that conversation. But so many times we think you know the answers, and that's not entirely accurate without having this conversation and learning what it is you need to do. So having an open door policy, and the same is true at the local level for school districts. We encourage our school districts to do the same thing. How do you invite family in? How do you invite the community in, right? So you can build. So when you talk, Dr. Schwartz, about character and all of that, it's not just what's happening in school, not only what's happening in school, but it's also what's happening at home and in the community, right? Isn't it great that we have conversations with faith-based organizations and our nonprofit organizations, and we have after-school programs, and we're building all that together, and we all recognize what it is that we contribute. Of course, I'll go back to educational success, but to make sure that our young people, wherever they are across our state, are benefiting from what's available to them, and that we're indeed getting the outcomes that we're looking for.
Thank you so much. And I want to switch gears just a little bit to talk a little bit more about the policy aspect of that. In our audience today, we have several policymakers or staff members who support policymakers across the country. So can we talk a little about how state policies can be aligned to better support the integration of service learning into K-12 curricula, ensuring that all students have access to these opportunities?
So if you look at what's happened in the country, one of the fastest growing policy has been in red and blue states, in purple, has been the use of civic seals. Civic seals are a recognition program that can be awarded to students, and you can shape the program as the commissioner's talking about, like that. All of these policies need to be shaped at the state or local level, right? So you can shape it any which way you want, but it is an idea that gets a lot of bipartisan support, that you should give recognition and recognize excellence in project-based or service learning activities. So that's one useful design. Other states have used civic projects or service learning credits as graduation requirements. Now, that is a little bit more controversial in some places. They can be used as a capstone, or they can simply be available as credit bearing, so that the students can have a better experience when moving on to higher ed, if that's the case. So those are some of the ways. We're very big proponents of civic seals, because we think they can gather a lot of, they allow for a structure that gives voice to students and their accomplishments and incentivizes engagement in the community. So I think that's a really good way. I will also just say that America's 250th anniversary next year in 2026 is a real opportunity for states policymakers to pass legislation that recognizes that activity and encourages service learning and other projects that are anchored in the founding principles of our country. And that, I think, might be a good way for policymakers to get support for that.
And so I'm so pleased Louise mentioned the civic seal. We now have proposed legislation in Connecticut that we've put forward for that to be able to have that program in Connecticut as well. We already have a seal of biliteracy program, which allows students to receive recognition upon graduation from high school for achieving proficiency in English and one or more languages. And we've got, 2022-23, nearly 4,000 students received the seal of biliteracy. And so we think this program speaks to the type of results that we hope to eventually see with the Civic Seal program as well. So we've proposed it. You can send all your good thoughts our way to get that approved, through the legislative process. But yes, so that's creatively thinking about, to her point, what are those things that we're able to do? And what better way to do that for something that's already working well? And to model, right, another program from that really is a good thing to do. So we're moving forward in that vein as well.
I'll be very brief. In collaboration with the National Youth Leadership Council, Character.org recently published a free ebook titled Developing Student Leaders Through Service Learning. And I hope everyone will be able to download that free ebook. We have a section on there directed to policymakers about how to integrate service learning into outcomes and into statewide expectations. But what's so amazing about the publication is that, as Louise was saying before, it starts with elementary school. It's best practices at that level, then in middle school, as well as in high school. We even have a section about after-school programs, whether it be the Boys and Girls clubs or the Ys or any other after-school, how they can integrate service learning as well. So I hope all the policymakers will, check out this free ebook and see the stories and narratives of schools across the country who are integrating it into their curriculum, into their classroom.
Thank you for sharing that resource, and I think we'll be able to drop that in the chat very shortly. Oh, it looks like it's there already. So thank you for dropping that. But as we continue to think about policy and what policymakers can do to support this work, what are some barriers or some challenges that they may need to consider as they're working to develop these policies for civic engagement and service learning to support K-12 students?
We're in a polarized political environment, right? I think that's an understatement. And so there are some barriers that need to be set up so people understand what we're talking about. When we talk about civics, it's a lot of things, right? It looks more like a sport than it does like a discipline in one class or other. So if adults take seriously civic engagement and civic preparation for students, they would train their teachers, as we talked about. They would make civic experiences available. They would integrate service learning, all of those things. But sometimes it gets so big that parents don't really know what we're talking about, right? They think that who knows what's happening, right? And I think that there's a level of transparency and family engagement, I think we touched on that before, that needs to occur. We need to start by making the case to communities and parents about what we're looking for, and also tied to what Dr. Schwartz would talk about. What's the portrait of a graduate? What is it that you want for your students and your community to graduate this kind of a student? And that will most likely involve things like critical thinking, collaboration, communication. I've yet to see a community that doesn't want these things. And civics throughout these different ways, right, is what builds that. But you cannot come in and go whole hog and say, okay, we're going to do civics in this way, without some of those barriers and without having laid the groundwork for parents and teachers, everyone, to buy into this program. I think that's what happens when things get very politicized, is that there's just not the preparation for what we're trying to do. Another suggestion that we would have is to engage the community in that way, and then build a civic learning plan for your school. So in this way, I'm talking more to school leaders, which is to say, how am I going to train all of my educators, K through 12, to make this a priority? How am I going to provide civic skills? How am I going to tie this to the local museum or the historical site or something like that? And what service learning opportunities will I provide? I've seen that done incredibly well when a school can find the resources through a community office, a community service office, or some kind of resource, central resource in which we can tie the community to the school. And then make that civic learning plan, the results of it, shareable, transparent to the entire community, so they know what's going on. A lot of times parents are or legislators they're afraid when they don't see the results, they don't see the excellence, they don't see what we're talking about. So that's what I was.
And I'll just add to that, for policymakers who may be listening to us here, you really have to understand your context in which you're working. If you're in my state right now, and I meet with my superintendents all the time, everyone's enough with mandates, right? Unfunded mandates, right? Those are the kinds of things we hear, that not just at the state level, we know we hear it at the federal level as well. So anything that looks like, seems close to, I'm going to give you something else to do on top of everything else that we're asking you to do, certainly it becomes very challenging. So understanding, it goes back to what I was saying, is that what are we currently doing? Do we understand what's happening? Maybe there's something we can build on that's already there, that is not separate, distinct, and new. And no matter how wonderful it is, our educators, we all know we have staffing shortages. I mean, all of those things that's there. And anything feel like, okay, you've got to do this, and this one more thing, and two more things, and all of that, just you don't get the outcomes that you're looking for. So how can we make sure in that space for policymakers that I know I keep saying it, but it cannot be overemphasized, about the communication and collaboration that's necessary, or as I just like to say, seek first to understand and then to be understood, right? And so you just need to understand what's happening, what the challenges are, and how is there a better path forward that you can work together on. And that is really important. The barriers come up every time there is something new you have to do, and there are more resources. And frankly, where families are also getting in the mix as well, because they hear that from their child's school, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, is one more thing. So we need to really have those conversations and work that through. That is really important.
I just want to say, Louise, you said 2026, that's next year. It's the first time I heard that. And it was just like, it's ringing in my ears right now that we are coming up next year to a very important moment in our nation's history. And I think we need to do something about it in terms of reflection and then moving forward. In terms of barriers, yes, this notion that my plate is full already, it's already overflowing, is the common refrain. But I just want to keep coming back to this notion that graduating good people who care up for others should be the plate. That should be where we start. And I really just want to emphasize that everything else that we do is part of the plate, but that is our mission.
And I would, Dr. Schwartz, I should add to that. And when we talk about barriers, but I always think about them as opportunities as well, right? So what are those opportunities? And that's where the conversation and the working together and the collaboration really works. Because what I may see as a barrier through conversations and collaboration may very well be the awesome opportunity that we all need to move forward.
So as my colleague, Mary Ellen Daniel says, so civics is, you're not adding it to the plate, it is the plate. Like it's so funny, Dr. Schwartz, that you said that is our plate. So Thank you.
But that's a mindset change that we all
Yeah,
have to come
yeah.
together and say it is the plate to graduate good people who care for others. That's what our mission is.
As we come up on time, I want to ask you all one final question, and it's a dreaming type of question. So, looking ahead, how do you see the role of service learning evolving in K-12 education over the next 5 or 10 years?
So I think that the education system is undergoing a tremendous amount of change, right? So we're seeing the private options are growing like at phenomenal rates. And I think that it's going to create a different kind of competitive environment than the charters did. And so at that point, I think that there will be a re-understanding of how we get to success. And one of the critical pieces of research is um, the importance of experiential learning in student achievement. And I think that's, to me, yes, there's difficult political environment right now. I think we're going to get through that. And I think that we're going to understand the levers that we can pull to become stronger communities. So I'm very optimistic about the fact that we all understand the value of applying and of reflecting on experiences for students, because that is what raises student engagement. We know student engagement is directly related to student achievement. So all that to say that I do believe that we will head in the right direction. It may take a little while.
And you know, the survey, I think, speaks to the fact that families are also wanting to connect and want their children connected to real world relevant experiences. There's more conversation about apprenticeships programs. There are more conversations about connecting with business and industry to be prepared for high demand careers. Lots of conversations about AI and what that looks like in education. I see all that together as an opportunity, right, for us to transform, right, and make sure that the young people on the end of this, right, to the point that Dr. Shorts made, are not only coming out prepared for learning life and work beyond school, but they are, right, the humans that we know that we need today, and that they can be fulfilled, right, in this economy and in this world and in their lives. And I think if we can work together, I really believe that we can get there. But we're at a point where there's all this conversation converging around all these issues. How do we transform our systems in order to do that? There are opportunities, and I think we should take advantage of them.
I'll just say that there is going to be a time soon where companies, large and small, are going to really believe in the mantra, hire for character, train for skills. And they're going to turn to our schools and say, we want people who really know how to work with each other, who care about doing their best work, who care about the communities that we serve. And I think that will be the vision where we begin to realize that's what schooling in the 21st and 22nd century will be all about.
Thank you so much for your engagement today. Thank you for the conversation. It was amazing to have this conversation with you all today. Before we do close the discussion, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of our upcoming webinars that the K-12 team again is hosting. Our next conversation will be on March 6th, also at 2 p.m. And it's going to be around unlocking leadership, the keys to success for women in education. So I'm very excited about that one. I will not be moderating that discussion. So I'm excited to see how that conversation will go. We'll be sure to drop the links to all of our webinars, and I encourage you to explore the webinars that the other teams are hosting. So with that, thank you again for your engagement today. Thank you for joining our panel, and we'll see you at the next discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.